You are engaging in the ELA Guidebooks Unit, Voices in America. The purpose of this video is to take a closer look at the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to help us better understand life during this time. Be sure you have your handout and something to write with as you watch the video. Can you imagine going to school and not being at school with your friends who look differently than you? What about women only having a few jobs to choose from, like being a teacher or a nurse or a secretary? As a citizen of our country, turning 18 years old means that you are eligible to vote in local, state, and federal elections. However, this has not always been true prior to the Civil Rights Act in 1964. African Americans were not allowed to vote, even though this right was granted to them in 1868 when African Americans were granted citizenship. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 outlawed discrimination against skin color, gender, religion, and ethnicity. What are civil rights? Let's break the phrase down and discuss each word individually. Civil is relating to ordinary citizens and their concerns. Rights are a moral or legal entitlement to have or obtain something or to act in a certain way. Putting it together, civil rights refers to the rights of a citizen to political and social freedom and equality. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 is a document with a list of rights. The document shown describes the civil rights granted to African American people to purchase homes in a neighborhood with white Americans. Take a moment to record your thinking in response to the question on your handout. Pause this video to record your answers at the first stop sign and press play when you are ready to continue. Let's review. Civil rights are political and social freedom and equality without restrictions. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 set this in motion for all American citizens, no matter their race, gender, or ethnicity. Let's take a closer look at the details of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. You may be wondering how certain states were still able to prohibit certain people from voting, even though laws had been in place for almost a century, stating that all United States citizens have the right to vote. States were able to get around this law by requiring citizens to pass a literacy or reading test in order to vote. This rule most certainly affected African Americans. Literacy was not as accessible to the African American community. Historically, their enslaved ancestors were not given the opportunity to learn how to read and write, which meant older generations could not support younger generations in literacy. The Title I section of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibited any state having unfair voting registration requirements, which meant voting should be equally accessible to all residents. Before the Civil Rights Act of 1964, people were segregated, which means separated by their race or the color of their skin. A lot of times, the services provided to those of color were less than those provided to the white people. The act of separating people by their skin color was called segregation. Some businesses would have separate bathrooms, water fountains, and seating areas for people of color. Another section of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 specifies that discrimination against someone is outlawed in public places. Title II declares that the services or spaces provided to people of color, different religions, or people from any country are promised to have the same and not separated public accommodations as white people. Some public places had to desegregate or end separation of people. Some examples include restaurants, movie theaters, and hotels. Now you are ready to think about some of the specific ways that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 outlawed unfair access to the civil rights. Pause this video to record your answers at the second stop sign and press play when you are ready to continue. Let's review. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 got rid of unfair voting restrictions and segregated places. This allowed more people to be able to vote and enjoy more options of these public places. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed by the United States government as a law, but it took a lot of work and passionate people to make this possible. You probably recognize some of the faces in this photo, especially Dr. Martin Luther King, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who is known for his peaceful protest and resistance to achieve equal rights for African Americans. One of the most famous protests he is known for is the Montgomery, Alabama bus boycott. Dr. King encouraged a movement of boycotting the city bus services due to the requirement of African Americans to sit in the back of the bus while white Americans sat in the front. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is also known for his I Have a Dream speech. The civil rights activist Martin Luther King Jr. outlined the long history of injustice in America and encouraged others to hold their country accountable to its own founding promises of freedom, justice, and equality for all. Another important person to the passing of the Civil Rights Act was Rosa Parks. She became famous for her involvement in the Montgomery bus boycott. Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat for a white person when the white section of the bus was full. Even though she was sitting on the colored section of the bus, she was asked to move seats. The bus driver and the others on the bus called the police. She was arrested. The Montgomery bus boycott took place 11 years prior to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 being signed into effect. However, these events led to the life that we know of today. Now you are ready to think about some of the most influential people who are responsible for working towards the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and how their actions contributed to the act. Pause this video to record your answers at the third stop sign and press play when you are ready to continue. Let's review. Your responses may have included Martin Luther King Jr., encouraged many people with his I Have a Dream speech, and led peaceful protests like the Montgomery bus boycott. Rosa Parks contributed to the civil rights movement by participating in the Montgomery bus boycott and for not giving up her seat on the bus just because it was expected of her. Both of these individuals made remarkable contributions to our way of life today. You have learned about how the Civil Rights Act of 1964 affected the lives of the Americans during this point in history. As you read the text in the ELA Guidebooks Unit, Voices in America, you will use this knowledge to help you think closely about what you read. When you finish this video, be sure to turn in your completed handout to your teacher.